All right, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. ReadySetData. I'm Anthony Fortner, data engineer, and with me, my fabulous co-host, Mr. Lee Markum, database administrator.
Hello,
How you doing?
everyone.
How you doing?
Pretty good. It's been a long week. I had a work project that was kind of sprung on me. Not It was rushed, but it's all good. I got to the finish line just like I intended. Uh, did all the things successfully, so we're good.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, burned a lot of midnight oil with that, didn't you?
I did. I did. I actually stayed up late one night because I hadn't had any fun that day. Like literally, I 8 to like 11 o'clock at night. It was work or eat, and that was it. So I stayed up, played PS3 till way too late, but I needed some fun. So, but anyway, it worked out. Okay, well, we lost Anthony for a minute there for some reason. We'll get him back. I do apologize for that. What we are going to talk about tonight, once Anthony gets rejoined, is we're going to be talking about topics or questions that you should be asking when you do an interview. Obviously, this is an IT focused scenario, so we're going to be talking about questions that you would ask an employer in an IT situation, IT interview situation. So last time we talked about several different topics or categories of topics, actually. And if you're interested, you can get the Word doc that this all is based on from that GitHub, github.com/Lee Markum/job and career development. So what we covered last time, as I mentioned, is just some different categories of interview questions. And that first one was company culture questions, things that you want to ask to find out what is going on behind the scenes so that you can learn about the company, you can learn what's going on, and find out if you're a match or not. And an early part of what we talked about is finding out whether the company is a match to you as much as you are a match to them. So remember, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. That next part, the next part or category that we talked about are benefits questions. So you want to know about, PTO and those kinds of things. And we talked a bit about that. That third category that we talked about last time was team environment questions. Who's on the team, how long they've been there, that sort of thing. All of that you can watch and get all the details on the last week's live stream when it goes, when it gets posted out onto YouTube. So for technical environment questions, that is our fourth category that you should be asking about when you are doing an interview in a technical situation. We're going to look at actually several different subcategories. And so that first category is going to be just general environment questions. Obviously, as a database administrator, and Anthony as a software developer or data engineer, we're going to be coming at this from from that particular slant. Software developers, other IT folks might have slightly different questions. But again, as I mentioned last time, this is all about not following the Word doc questions to the letter of law, but understanding the intent behind the questions. I want the questions to make you think about the kinds of things that you would want to consider in a technical interview. So In just a kind of a general environments category, I would want to know how many SQL Server instances are there? What's the largest database size? Those questions can tell you a lot about your scope of work. If you ask that question and you get, oh, there are 12 SQL servers here at company XYZ, that tells you something potentially about the amount of work you have. If they say there are 1,200, that's a little different. That's a lot different. Same thing on the largest database size. If they say, oh, the largest database is 500 gigabytes and we only have, maybe 5 or 10 databases, that tells you one thing about the kind of workload that you might have, the kinds of work that you might anticipate having to do based on database sizes. If they say, oh, all of our databases are between 1 and 10 terabytes, that gives you a different feel, a different look about what you might have to do, how much work there might be. If you have a very large environment, as we mentioned in some of the earlier questions, like the team environment questions, you're going to want to know or keep in mind the answers. If they said, we have 100 SQL servers and the largest database size, we're between 1 and 2 terabytes on all of our databases, and they told you that you're the only DBA, that if you're fine with that, great, but just realize you're walking into a whole lot of work if you're the only person on the team that understands and or works with databases on that kind of level. Same thing from a software engineer or the data engineer aspect as well. If you have a massive environment and you're the only person doing your role, you need to think long and hard about whether you want to step into that or not. Maybe you do. Maybe you love that. I don't know. The other another set of questions related to just general environment is, are there other database platforms? There might not be just SQL Server, and in a lot of companies, it's multi-database. They have things like Oracle. They may have MongoDB, MariaDB, MySQL, PostgreSQL. You need to ask that so that you know what you're getting into, and you need to know, am I going to be responsible for any of those other platforms? That's definitely an important thing. If they want a person who is multi-platform and you're not that person, then you have to ask them, are you okay with the fact that I only know technology X, but I'm willing to learn the others? And again, that's going to tell you a lot. If they say, yeah, it's fine, we can teach anyone, and you're willing to be taught, that's fine. Maybe a follow-up question in that particular case is going to be that you would ask, so I know that there are 3 or 4 other technology platforms here that you just mentioned, and you're fine with me learning. What's the timetable? How quickly do you need me to learn in order to be satisfied that I am fulfilling the responsibilities that you had in mind? The other idea there is, are there other teams for those platforms? Will I be interacting with those folks? So another question that I would always ask if I were interviewing somewhere is this: what versions and editions of SQL Server are in use? And what is the percentage breakdown of those versions and editions? So what I'm getting at or trying to get at here is, I want to know, are you primarily using SQL Server Standard, SQL Server Enterprise, 2012, 2014, SQL Server 2016? And what's the breakdown? Is it mostly an old environment that wants to go and become newer? The company wants to move it forward? Or are you already on the bleeding edge? Maybe it's almost all SQL Server 2019, and they're already installing the recently generally available SQL Server 2022. based on those answers, you're going to get a very different feel for what technical scenarios you might be encountering. And it looks like we have Anthony back. We're going to see if I can get him added back in. Hey, Anthony, are you back?
I'm looks like it. Hey.
Okay.
First thing I
Very
checked
good.
was I did in fact pay the internet bill, so that wasn't a problem. I think it was a loose wire because once I unhooked and plugged everything back in, I was back in black pretty quickly there. But
all right. So I just kept rolling.
Yeah.
We're talking about the general environment questions, and I'm talking about versions and editions of SQL Server, what's in use, what's the percentage breakdown, just so people, and the question there is, the idea behind this question is just getting a feel for the environment. Am I dealing with an old environment, SQL Server 2008 R2, that you're going to want to upgrade, or am I bleeding edge and it's all SQL Server 2019, and you have a person who is pushing to install SQL Server 2022 right now, which would be me, by the way, but
Yeah.
I have to follow what other people want as well. I can't just do whatever I want. So the next question there that I wanted to ask about, and we can kind of collaborate here on where we're at, is the IT environment using physical servers? Is it private cloud like VMware or Hyper-V? Is it public cloud or some kind of combination of these? Is it hybrid? I think this is a great question because it tells you a lot about how the company feels about hardware and cloud, which is definitely something you want to find out these days. Any questions, comments, or concerns about any of that? How do you feel about the versions and editions of SQL Server question, and or are there other database platforms kinds of questions?
Yeah. You definitely want to know what you're getting into with older versions and differing versions. I think even having 2 or 3 reasonably up to date SQL servers out there can still have a mental overhead. If you have an environment where there's 80, 100, 120, 300 instances floating around, and there are several different versions, then that's a mental overhead. You might find yourself dealing with a recent one all the time, and then you make a change, you do a thing. I've seen this plenty of times with just T-SQL, right? You have a SQL statement that is whiz bang and great. You push it out everywhere. It hits that 2012, 2008 version, and then sad trombone, it won't work. So there's definitely a mental overhead, and this gives you an opportunity to ask, so why? Like, why do you have some? Why do you still have that older than 2008 instance floating around? What's the reason behind that? What's the whys? It might give you an idea of how they're thinking and how the other DBAs or previous DBAs or whatever wording applies in the situation. What were they thinking? What do they have to deal with? Were they trying to get up to date? Or is it kind of a shrug, it's fine situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree on all of those observations and thoughts there. So that's again why it's important to ask these questions. You want to know the answers to these things so that you can evaluate any potential offer that might come your way and ask clarifying questions toward the end of the process if you in fact do get some sort of offer. So.
Are you able to see the questions from LinkedIn?
No,
Okay, I do. So I'll let you know.
Okay.
Alexandria asks, is there a better answer to the cloud versus physical service question?
Is there a better answer? Oh, I see that. What I understand. The better answer is that you don't hear them tell you that they're still using physical servers. To me, that just is for me, that's a huge red flag. I wouldn't want I wouldn't want that, because that just tells me the company isn't forward thinking. That's how I feel about that answer.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder also. When I read it, I didn't think this, but then hearing you say the words "physical server" made me realize this might be a good time for a clarifying question. So this sounds like physical service is one option, but what about VMs that are still on-prem versus cloud? Is Alexandria's question really on-prem versus cloud, or is it physical service versus everything else? Because I think
Yeah.
that kind of depends. Because I wasn't thinking the way you were originally. I was thinking I just automatically like change it to on-prem versus cloud. And then my answer would be it really just depends on the why or your personal preferences. So Lee, you've been living the cloud lifestyle for a while. You may not want to go to a fully on-prem company. It
Right.
may not be with us anymore. Some people might be living a very on-prem lifestyle. They have that down, and they want to find a company that's starting to move to the cloud, or maybe they don't. That's fine.
Sure.
So I think that's kind of a personal question, unless Alexander's question was worded the way you read it, which makes sense. In which case, then yeah, individual servers um, that's harder to deal with, right?
Yeah, and I think you're right. It is a personal preference question. If you're on-prem and you're comfortable there and you feel like in your space, your technical space, there's longevity to that, okay, that's totally fine. If you're already working in the cloud, though, and you are come across a company that's only on-prem, then you also have to think about that. Does that look like a step back? I don't know. Again, you have to figure that out for yourself. Is it going to feel like a step back? Maybe you've been in cloud and you don't like it, and you find someplace that is physical or their VMware, as you mentioned, Anthony, and that looks attractive to you because you're not excited about cloud. Then maybe they've given you exactly the information you were looking for.
Okay. And Alexandria did respond saying that she meant it the way you read it. So gold star for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I'm glad.
I don't know. So she also asked, I wasn't sure how much of the corporate world has already switched. I don't know. So that'd be very interesting to find out.
Yeah, most of what I see out there involves some sort of cloud, but I'm sure there are many companies that are just not going to do that, and for whatever reason. And so they haven't switched. They're not planning on switching. People will get fired if they switch. that's a big extreme, but I mean, I'm sure that perspective is out there.
Well, I hope if you're switching the locations of uh, the company's most important asset, second most important asset, data, that everyone above you knows beforehand. First thing, people, of course, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So let's see, where are we at on the questions? Looks like I was asking about how often are Windows updates and SQL Server updates or service packs applied. Now, again, with that service packs part there, if you're familiar with SQL Server, you realize that I might need to update that question. But the thrust of the question, the idea behind it is the company keeping up to date? If they tell you, oh, we patch every 6 months, okay. If they say we're patching on patch Tuesday without fail, that also tells you something. So
yeah, if you work in an environment where it's pulling teeth in order to get things upgraded, or you know, most of the time these patches are important because bug fixes or security fixes. So you put yourself in a dangerous situation if you're not. So if they have a lot of trouble doing that, they don't have a plan, then I guess there's two scenarios. One, are you interested in playing in that sandbox? Or two, are they asking for help and you might be able to bring something to the table? Maybe if they're having trouble figuring out how to do that in a safe manner, maybe you can. This would be a good time for you to suggest how that can happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if there's a question in here, but this all makes me, all these questions about hardware and cloud versus not and all of that, and patching makes me wonder about something that just completely went out of my head. So that will be an
We saw
interesting part
that
of the video.
thoughts. Yeah, we saw that
went,
thought's full life cycle right there. Like it into your brain. You got excited. You explained why you were jumping off script, and then
it just went away. So I'll probably remember it in the middle of something completely unrelated later. So it's all good.
Between that and internet outages is what we do when we go live, right? It's a risk we take. So is the next one, if the environment is physical, how often is the SQL Server hardware replaced?
Yeah, again, if they tell you once every 5 years, yeah, that tells you something. If it's private cloud and it's VMware, again, that if it's once every couple of years, then they want to stay current. They want to make sure that their environment has the greatest or the latest and greatest stuff for the most part. Again, these are all questions that tell you something about how do they feel about change. Are they comfortable with it? Are they not comfortable with it? Are they going to hug the SQL Server 2000 and feed it carefully, or did they kill that thing a long time ago? I think that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right. So the next question is, can you describe the development or sandbox area for testing new technologies? Why am I asking this question? Why do you think I am? Yeah, I'm asking you. Why do you think I'm asking this question?
So I'd be asking the question for selfish reasons. I want to know whether or not I get to play with the new toys, and find out how they work and everything. And for non-selfish reasons too, right? So, for example, SQL Server 2022 was just announced, right?
Yep.
Within a month, I think, not that long ago. And at my place of employment, we're already tearing down our old, I'm gonna call them play servers for the stream, our own play servers, and we're going to stand up 2022. Not for production workload. Being paranoid is part of the DBA lifestyle, right? So we're going to stand them up, and we're going to start putting loads on them, try some things, figure out how it works, feel how it feels, and then as we hear things like there's a bug or whatnot, we can do our own testing. So if you don't have a sandbox to play with new technology, then you have two options. You never touch the new technology, right? Or on the day that something gets turned off by Microsoft, you're in a panic trying to figure out how to get the new system stood up, and you don't know what you're getting into. Yes, Microsoft is really good about backwards compatibility, but there's still surprises. And if an hour outage costs your company $1 million, do you want to be as prepared as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And if there isn't a sandbox at all, then where do you develop? And if you say production, I might be really uncomfortable with that answer.
Oh, you were talking about like dev or like development. See, I'm misreading these things, and I thought that was standing up SQL servers, like physically putting up machines in the virtual sense, and trying out new technology.
No, I agree with everything you said.
Okay.
Again, I mean, these questions can be taken in multiple ways, and that's part of what's great about them. Not only you, the person who's asking them, have a perspective, the employer or the potential employer also has a perspective, and you get to hear how it strikes them when you answer these questions, or when you propose these questions, and guide the conversation to whatever piece of information it is that you might be looking toward. I absolutely agree with you. If If there is no sandbox, then you have to think about, okay, well, that means I don't get to play with new toys. And what does that mean for my career? Which you then, I feel like you've got to go back to the previous questions where you're asking about what versions and editions of SQL Server are installed. If there's no sandbox to test new technologies, and a company tells you, oh, our newest SQL Server is 2012. If you're comfortable being stuck on legacy software and legacy platforms, great, you're golden. If you want a modern job that will keep you employed for years to come, you might think about whether that's the place for you.
Right.
Well,
It can be a personal question you ask yourself, right?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Next question here is, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. How does the company handle routine database maintenance like indexes and DBCC checks?
Yeah, so I'm asking this question because I want to see, do they even do maintenance, first of all? And how do they feel about maintenance if they are doing it? I've been exposed to companies and teams that seemed very maintenance averse, or they had deep misunderstandings about these kinds of maintenance like CheckDB or other kinds of related things that you need to do for a SQL Server database to make sure that there's no corruption, that the data is good. And so I want to hear how they address those kinds of thoughts when they answer this question.
You want to know if they say DBCC what while they're hiring
Yes.
a DBA?
Yes.
Because that tells you they really need you, right?
That's true. Yes, it does. If they haven't heard of CheckDB, that's something to think about. Some companies go crazy with maintenance. They'll rebuild all their indexes every night. They will be the opposite extreme, and they don't do that at all because they've heard it's not good from somewhere and they don't do it. I don't know. So yeah, I'm looking for any extremes when I ask that.
Yep. Or to get their thoughts, get them talking about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Next section, security and compliance related questions. What are security practices like?
Yeah, good open-ended question. I just want them to talk about their security posture. What comes to mind when I say security practices? I want to hear them opine about that. And kind of see where the conversation leads me. What are they going to tell me?
What's the first thing that comes to mind when you say that? Because it might be something that's on their mind, right? Or they might think a lot about security and immediately have to hit you back with another question. What do you mean? This kind, that kind? Login users, PC, how do people log on? Network, how's all the infrastructure, the networking set up? A lot of questions there.
Yeah, for sure. So as a follow-up, then who has access to the databases? What type of access do they have?
They break into a song and start singing "Everybody," then you're in trouble.
Yeah, you're in trouble if that's their answer, for sure.
Well, I guess they are.
Yes, both. You're in trouble, and so are they. And you have to figure out whether you want to wrestle that trouble or not. If you were to accept a position there, what the answer to this can tell you what you're walking into for sure. I found that most companies just give access too liberally, and it's not about not trusting people. It's about making sure that you lower the points of attack on your systems. And from a data engineer, software developer, sysadmin perspective, all of those broader or broader scoped technology roles, this is an important question. What, as a sysadmin, am I going to be giving network access and SA privileges and that to just pretty much anyone? Am I comfortable with that?
Do they want to change that, or is that matter of fact?
Right. Is it even a concern? Yeah. All right. You want to get our next question?
Sure. What type of auditing tools are there to maintain compliance? So examples, SQL Server Audit, IDERA, compliance. Every time I say that, I feel like I'm slurring it up. IDERA, compliance tools, or DLM dashboard. So I'm guessing you listed those because those are the ones you're more familiar with.
Correct. And there are other third-party products. One just came to mind, but I can't. It's one of those things where it came in and went out. There are lots of things out there, is the point. And I just want to know, what are they using? Are they using anything? Like, how do they know when there's been a compliance problem?
Have they thought about this at all?
Right.
And this probably really depends on size, right? Like, if it's a smaller company and you're the first DBA, maybe not. If it's a very large company, they might have a lot of auditing happening.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a great point, that the answers that you get to these questions, or maybe even whether you want to ask some of these questions, might depend on the size of the company that you're interviewing with. So you keep that in mind as well. Yeah. Along those lines, are there things like Sarbanes-Oxley or PCI compliance that this company is going to have to, or already is thinking about or doing something with? That's certainly a question you want the answer to, because that may or may not complicate your life in the role that you're being interviewed for.
Gotcha. How would that complicate things for you? What do you mean? Would that be a negative if they have extra layers of compliance?
No, so it would complicate things in the sense that the security controls are tighter, and you're going to have to go through some kind of auditing exercise on some sort of interval, at least yearly, if not more frequently than that, where you're going to have to prove, for example, that you haven't stepped outside your corporate policies of everybody is assigned to an Active Directory group. That Active Directory group is assigned to the SQL server. We don't give out individual permissions. If that's your policy and that's what you're working on for security, then you got to stick with that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you have to be able to prove that you're sticking with it. Thus, the auditing question before this. So, yeah.
100%. So next category, automation and change management.
Yes.
So go on.
I'm interested in your input about this because of the data engineer that you are now and the background, the emphasis you put into your own career about automation and that sort of thing. So what do we got in this category, Anthony?
First up, what automation processes are in place? For example, are SQL servers installed? Are the SQL Server installations automated, or are there much use of PowerShell, Python to automate tasks? So you're basically asking, is everything a manual process and automatic? And you already kind of alluded to this. I have a major bias. I want things automated. I want things repeatable. I want to be able to stand up something, destroy it, stand it up, destroy it, stand it up 3 times in a row, and it's always the same, right? That's at least that's my dream. So I would be asking that question. And to follow up, if they answered no, I'd ask if there's a particular reason for it, right? Not everyone believes in that. I think most people see the value in that, but there's this bias. You'll see a meme on LinkedIn or wherever every once in a while. Someone's like, "Why spend 20 minutes doing a thing when you can spend 6 hours automating it?" Kind of making fun. But
Right.
if I see that, I always like it because I actually agree with that statement. Um, the first year, second year, third year, I don't know what your tolerance level is. See, I'm already going to make a 10-minute spiel on the first question. Uh, the first couple of years of being in IT, maybe you get some enjoyment out of doing the mundane tasks over and over again. But there's only so many times that you'll want to do that, I assume. And at some point, those things become less interesting, and you'd rather spend your day doing the more interesting things and let automation handle the mundane, even if it's only 20 minutes. Because that 6 hour investment that you did 3 years ago, if it's still working, that's a 20-minute process I don't have to deal with anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
So
Right.
what about
this one?
what about this monkey wrench of an idea? So let's suppose that you're interviewing for an entry level job that requires 5 years of experience, because why not? They all do, right? And they tell you, oh, we automate everything from the ground up. When you come in, you're going to learn all of our automation systems. Do you think that would affect someone learning the foundational basics of how a thing works if the first thing they learn is how to automate it?
So I think you can make an argument for that in the same way that I'm sure there's a lot of people who know how to use their car but probably can't build it from scratch. So if you want to build a car from scratch, you may not want to buy one and just drive it, right? But a lot of us don't have the time or energy to build a car from scratch, right? So my argument is it depends on where you're at in your career. So what you asserted was this is entry level position. Well, if your goal is to definitely learn and you want a job that'll let you start from zero but not do anything in automation for some reason, then yeah, you might want to dodge the job. If somebody I knew was coming to me and asking me this question and they were in that situation, I'd argue this is an IT job. Getting in is the hardest part a lot of times. So go for it, learn that automation, and you can fill in. In other words, go back to my analogy. You can drive the race car and go, "Wow, this is fast," and then go, "Well, can I get some time? Can I get some time in to learn how that engine works? Can I learn how to make tweaks, right?" And then now that you have the experience, if the company you're at won't let you learn those basics, then you can learn on your own and move on to a company that will let you do those things.
Yeah. It was just a thought that occurred to me that maybe I'm going to pick something because of a recent project. Let's say you're a newish DBA and you don't have much experience with log shipping, for example. Mm-hmm. And someone hands you this script and says, we need to log ship these databases from here to here, plug in this stuff and hit go. And that's all the person ever. I mean, I can't say that's all they do, but like if you could reach a point where that's what you do and you don't understand what's happening behind the scenes, you're just plugging in variables and you hit go and you watch it do its thing and you're doing something in an automated way, but you're not really understanding what you're doing.
That's a conversation you should have with your peers and your supervisor, manager, leaders. Like if you're really doing a job where all you're doing is pushing a button and you're not learning how anything works underneath at all, then what happens when it breaks? Are you just going to lean on your team lead? Maybe. But if that's not for you, then express to them like I want to be able to fix things. I want to be able to handle these. I'd like to be involved in those unique cases because even though I just spent 10 minutes on the first question talking about how much I like automation, it breaks sometimes. Or you have a unique case. This automation is great. It's super whiz bang, but it needs an air connection. And we're doing something in a very air gapped, super secure way. I can't do that. So, yeah. So have those conversations. I mean, I know you're like, it's a curiosity and you kind of, building up the scenario. But for me, it's like, if you're new and trying to get in, I think it's almost a non-problem, because it sounds like you have no experience in this situation. So get in and then start talking to people. Hey, I do want to learn the trade. I don't want to just press F5 or run the script.
Right.
I would think they would value that.
I would hope so. It was just, I hope that's not too derailing. It was just a question I thought of.
Yeah.
Amusing. Yeah.
I mean, it was just musing. There you go. What is the SQL code review process? Is it different for the data team versus the development team? So what I'm asking here, since we're talking about change management, it's not necessarily the buttons and the switches on the server, right? The data teams may be changing the SQL they use for the data pipelines. Your mid-tier folks, your app developers are changing some SQL in their application, right? Or maybe store proxy being changed, depending on how everyone's. That's a good question to ask. How is that set up anyway? So who's reviewing those changes? So in some environments, just the team's looking at it. This is our service. We're going to change the SQL. In some environments, the changes are handed off to Lee. Lee, here's my script and a box of donuts. Did you want some coffee? Please review my script. We'd like it on prod next week, right? There's a whole different ways to do this. So what is that code review process, right?
Yeah.
And then I asked, is it different for the data team versus the development team? Because just recently I've been hoping to standardize that at the company I work at. So right now, you might just make a change, and then a few other people have to approve it. I'm trying to get everybody looking at everybody's SQL, because once you reach a certain size, Lee might make a very intelligent change to something that completely derails something that I implemented recently, right? That happens. If that code change popped up in a code review, even if it was approved, if you see a code change that said, I touched whizbang, and you're like, no, what's whizbang? That's something I was working on. You can click on and see the code that was submitted, right?
Right.
You know something all the time. I just literally this what's today's date? Yeah, this month. I got you the date. Literally this month, there was a situation where two people work on the same proc, right? And they had no idea, because not all, depending on your size, not all the teams talk. But implementing code review means one went up, the other one, even if they weren't originally going to review the code, sees that message saying made changes to blank to allow blank, and they can go, whoa, and now those two pieces of code got merged, right? So now somebody didn't overwrite somebody. Anyway, that's what I'm saying there. Like, find out how code goes up, because, and I want to know what you think about this, Lee. In some places, the SQL code goes out because our team approved it, and it's our code. It's our code, Lee. No, it's our code. It goes out. It's on prod. Next day, it breaks. Whose code is it now?
It's my code.
Come on, Lee. Write it down.
Yeah, this is why I don't like isolated teamwork, because once it goes out to production, then it becomes my responsibility, and I don't want stuff that's my responsibility that hasn't been looked at by a wider group of people and integrated into what's already being ran and reviewed and tested somewhere besides prod, because I don't want prod blowing up. And I know dev and other teams don't want prod blowing up either, but if that's your goal, then that's part of why you ask this question about SQL code review processes, because if you don't have one and you're literally just testing in prod, you're more likely to blow things up and have, issues with customers and writing, root cause analysis and explaining yourself. So
Yeah, so just make sure I squash a myth. Everyone tests the code. The question is, do they test it before it goes to prod? Right?
right. Yeah, that's the question. Where are you testing it? Yeah.
All right. Next one up. What kind of CI/CD, so continuous integration, continuous deployment, what kind of continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline is there for automation of SQL changes? So another one that's close to my heart, right? Not every company does this. Were you about to say something?
Right. Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, again, another one I think is important. I'm a big fan of continuous integration, especially with SQL, and I like the code to get deployed to dev as quickly as possible. So again, if somebody makes a change and it goes to code review, it's affecting dev right away. And then if the dev team or the data team has tests in place, we can get those alerting right away. And it really doesn't matter whether or not we're talking about the BI team, the data team, or the application developers, right? If everyone has tests in place, then we want to know as soon as possible if something's off. So please have testing.
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of these questions. So we have two more questions that I want to go ahead and read and I'll comment on. What's the change management / software development and rollout process like? And how often are changes pushed into production? Taken all together, these questions seem redundant, and in one sense they are. But again, I'm trying to give people options of how to ask questions. And you might pick one method over another. Some of these questions are there specifically to prompt you to ask them in case the employer doesn't answer them. So, like, how often are changes pushed into production? It's not entirely probable. I mean, it's possible that someone could answer one of the previous questions and not tell you how frequently. But again, taken together, these are just questions that you want to find out the answers to. What is automated? What's the level of automation? How important is change management? So one thing I didn't put in here is that I just thought of is there a change advisory board? Is there a group of people that meet, I'm going to make something up, once a week, and they review all of the changes before anybody even pushes the button for automation for deployment? What does that look like? Is it just a person where you submit a ticket and some guy, some person looks at it and says yes, and then you can push the button? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. What does that look like? And it's probably a hybrid too. Some things go to cab, some things do not. What's the magic line there? Is it based on time, effort, cost, who's asking? Yeah, it's good to differentiate that. Hopefully get some honest answers.
Yeah, does it also depend on what client is asking for it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the next category of questions is around high availability and disaster recovery. Again, we're in this technical category, overall technical category of the technical questions you want to ask. In this kind of subcategory of high availability and disaster recovery is the next topic here. So just a broad question: what high availability technologies are in place? What do you think an employer typically? What do you hope that an employer would say, or what do you hope to get out of this kind of question if you were asking it, Anthony?
So I'll answer both of those. What I'm hoping to get out of this is to find out it's something they think about, something they don't, what the reasoning is. And then you basically get an idea of where they are in that scale, right? there are use cases, there are scenarios where people like we want to be up as much as possible, but we're not going to spend that extra X $100,000 to make it really good uptime because if it goes down at 7:30 p.m., we're probably fine. There's those use cases, right? This is where you find that out, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that sounds nice because less on call. Um, but if they're if high availability is very important to them, you want to know that too, especially if that excites you, right? I think it's something we might have in common. We like the idea of seeing how many nines we can get out of a system. Um, so yeah, that's what I'm hoping to get out of it. And the first one is what are you hoping to hear? Me, availability groups. I've grown kind of a bias to that. I'm a SQL Server professional mostly, so I don't even know what the competing database software does as far as all that. But availability groups have been around for a while, and I've grown very happy with them and some of their features. So I'm hoping to hear that, as opposed to like log shipping in 2012 or something.
Yeah, I think those are all great perspectives. I'm looking for the same kind of thing. What are they thinking about high availability? What is how important is it to them? And if you get oh we have 9 distributed always on availability groups across the entire planet, then they're taking it really seriously. And you have to think about, do I even understand distributed availability groups? If they say, oh, we just have another database that we kind of sort of log ship to sometimes, that's the other extreme. Or maybe the other extreme is what's high availability? We don't do that here.
Yeah. So yeah, and then and again, as I'm hearing you comment, it's a good time for me to say again, a lot of these are personal. You may not have. I've definitely talked to candidates who did not have a lot of experience with um, availability groups, for example, or some other high availability strategy, but they're looking for it. So you might be asking the candidate person listening to this, you might be asking because you're in a situation where you don't get to deal that much, and you're hoping to. You've done your studying, you've learned some things, but like a lot of this, you really learn by getting your hands dirty. And then if you want to get better than that, you have to teach. So it might be very personal to you.
Yeah, for sure. So you might also get things like, oh, we're using Azure Managed Instance. And behind the scenes, Azure MI does a whole bunch of things for you. Or, you might be on some other cloud platform using their specific way of having high availability. I kind of gave away a potential answer to this next question when I was talking about HA, which also demonstrates that sometimes people think of these two terms as interchangeable when they're technically not. What disaster recovery technologies or processes are in place?
So one is like, what do we do to stay up all the time? The next question is, so what do we do when we inevitably go down, which is why it's not 100, it's 5 nines. What do we do to try to get things back up? And then another question is, what's the requirements on that? Are we supposed to make sure we're back up within X hours, 1 hour, X minutes?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And so high availability technically is like what you described. If my SQL Server goes down, how do I ensure that there's some sort of immediate standby that keeps things running? The disaster recovery is if a tidal wave destroys the data center we're in. Hopefully we are not in it, just our equipment. But if the data center is down, the whole data center goes down. How do we keep things running anyway? Do we have another data center on the West Coast? And by the way, if you say, oh, we have a data center a few miles away across the river, that's the wrong answer. That's not disaster recovery. If your DR plan is something that is nearby your primary data center,
Depends
Just
on
so
the
you know.
depends on the disaster, right? Like 20 minutes away might be great for a tornado, but it's bad for an asteroid, or in your case, a tsunami. Tsunami.
Yeah, a tsunami. Um, yeah, your disaster recovery needs to be a significant distance away from your primary site. If we're still talking like on-prem data data centers sort of thing, which is why,
That might be still true of the cloud, which maybe
right.
you might talk about that.
Yeah, so that's why in the follow up or this next question, if cloud is in use, are the SQL servers set up as multi AZ or multi region? Then you're relying on the cloud provider to do what's necessary and or your choices to help you. I mean, if you put everything in US East 1 in AWS and you don't have anything anywhere else, you kind of hurt yourself. For
Yeah,
an
if
example.
you're gonna put the effort in to get something in the cloud into Azure or AWS, um, if you're wanting any high availability out of this, then having it in multiple locations, multiple continents, depending on your case, it's a good idea, right? I mean,
Yeah.
outages happen. People talk like the cloud is always up. It's not. I mean, you hear about certain companies being out for a little while, and it's because AWS was out. This particular location was out. This situation happened, right? Cloudflare, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera.
Right. I mean, even within a certain region, there are things that you can do for high availability and that the cloud provider will do behind the scenes for you. But if you lose access to the whole region and your stuff is only in that region, you kind of have a problem. So just things to think about for high availability and disaster recovery. Next category is in this technical interview or technical section for an interview is monitoring related questions. You want to know something about the monitoring that the company hopefully has in place. Do you want to start us off there?
Yeah. So why are they watching you? What are they hoping you're going to do? Just kidding. Monitoring the SQL servers. Is there any third-party monitoring software in place for either databases or machines themselves? And you have quite a list here. Essentially One, Spotlight, App Dynamics, Dynatrace. Yeah. So you want monitoring. The why behind that is you want to know if something's wrong. Sometimes you want to know if something's wrong, but not wrong enough that end users notice yet. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you want some monitoring. Um, so not only do you want it, you want to find out what kind they have because maybe you've only touched one or two tools so far in your career. Going on you know, maybe not even junior. Maybe you've been in the industry for 12 years, but you worked at two companies exclusively, so you touched two different monitoring softwares. You want to know if you're getting into something else, or you want to know if you're getting into something with a monitoring tool that you're not happy with. I'm not saying that's a deal breaker, but you want to know what you're going into, right? Or if it is a deal breaker, Lee, explain that to me. Is there monitoring software you just know about?
Yeah, again, these are all personal preference situations. Someone says, oh, we only use technology X for monitoring, and you happen to hate technology X, you got to think about that. And think about it in the total context of the interview and everything else you've learned about the company. Is this the first red flag? Is this the first concerning thing? If it is, might not be a big deal unless you really, really hate the platform. Is this the third, fourth, or 30th red flag? Okay, then you probably should bail at that point. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there is a monitoring software that would be a nope. I was just asking in case, because if there was, there'd probably be a good story. Next up, how does someone know when there is a problem? So this is monitoring, but I think we've crossed over to alerting, right?
Correct. Yeah. I want to know how I want to know about alerting. What do you guys do? Is it all emails? Does the email go to some support thing, which then, if it's an urgent support matter, triggers something like another platform that rings my phone in the middle of the night? Or what do you do? What does that look like?
Yeah, what's the chain for that? How often? This kind of bleeds into. I don't remember if we covered it last week, the first half of this. We talked about on call.
I think we did, but this is. I mean, we can talk a bit
This
about
is
on call
related.
now.
Yeah, how I
It
know
is.
there's a problem. What happens after hours? You said you have some platform. I'm gonna name one PagerDuty that'll go off. Is my phone going to explode? Is somebody else's phone going to explode? Do we take turns? Does everyone get a message and we just see who logs in first? Questions to ask. That sounds chaotic. Ooh.
Ooh, that gives me an idea though. If everybody on the team really loved donuts, to go back to your donut example of bribing the DBA to put your code in place, you could alert everyone, and whoever responds first gets the box of donuts the next day. I don't know.
I
That could
worked at
be
a
interesting.
company. I worked at a company as a young man. This is way before IT. As a young man, I worked for a company who did that. They had like an on call where they paid you some small amount for being on call just in case somebody called in, um, and then they would randomly call even if they didn't need somebody. And if you responded, then you got paid a higher rate for that on call time. It was kind of cool. It's like winning the lottery. It's incentivized you to answer the phone.
It does. Yes, that's true. That's true.
Anyway, sorry, that's random thought. Random thoughts of Anthony.
Yeah. So I really love this next question that you added. Let's talk about that.
Oh yeah. So this one, even if it's not technical, belongs in an interview, especially in IT. When there is a problem, how many people should I expect to stand behind my desk while I investigate? I've done this. I have to admit that I caught myself. But when there's a problem, there's this, and especially if it's important or feels urgent, how many people are going to get watching over your shoulder, right?
Yeah.
That's stressful. That's hard. That's a good question to ask to see what the response is. Because sometimes people might accidentally give you an honest answer, right? Um, it also gets that conversation happening, how they feel. Some people really do feel like they need to watch,
Yeah.
and you want to know that.
Yeah, for sure.
I can't type when people are watching, so like you're just hampering the process. So
Yeah, I agree, and I've noticed that's just kind of a phenomenon in every place I've been at. Like if I do screen share, for example, because I'm working from home these days, but so if I do screen share with people, they forget how to type. I forget how to type if they're watching me and I'm doing the thing. It's just kind of something we accept, or at least I do.
yeah, same here.
So this last question in monitoring again is just another way of asking the same thing, but I want to throw it out there. What is done right now to collect a baseline of application or SQL Server performance? Again, I'm looking for what monitoring software is out there. Are you just using Performance Monitor? Are you collecting weight statistics? What third party tools are out there? There are some platforms, if it's not data specific, the role that you're interviewing for isn't data specific. Maybe it's a sysadmin role. There are still platforms that use or need IIS, for example. Are you monitoring IIS somehow? Because there are ways to do that. Not just is it up, but like what's the performance of your app running through IIS? You can get that information. And so this is just another way to find out what's the company doing to make sure that the hardware and applications I might be interested in are actually working and working well.
Yeah, I like that in this one you mentioned the application because as we do, everything's been very database specific so far. But I'm learning now as our monitoring and our analytics is getting better, that once you have software in place that takes care of the whole stack, the insights are so much greater.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
oh, the performance is bad. The first thing they do a lot. Well, not everybody, but I think there's a strong urge for people to go, well, it
it's the
must be the
database.
database. Yeah. And lately it hasn't been, but now, and then, so it's fine. When there's a problem, you know, part of the data team's job is to investigate that, right? Get it? It's fine.
Yeah,
I'll definitely play that game where it's like, okay, let's prove it's not us because we pretty much know it's not us. Um, and sometimes it is, but usually we have a gut instinct. I feel like after you've done it in a while, problems follow patterns. But now it's in the point where, as soon as it's a performance issue or an outage of some kind, you can open it up and you can see that, the database is responding in 300 milliseconds. So that's not the problem. Oh, we're calling something 1,000 times, and we're doing 1,000 of those calls. So, and they're talking to other services, or whatever the situation may be. Yeah,
right.
being able to see the application's behavior is very helpful, and it'll save you time, so you don't have to prove that your database is working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is another aspect of monitoring. I'm very database centric, but I would prefer a place that has monitoring from the browser down to the app, down to the database, because it's not, despite the bias, it's not always the database. Sometimes the database is humming along just fine, and if you don't have what I'll call full stack monitoring, then the DBA or data engineers or whoever ends up on the calls with the app teams essentially has to prove it's not the database. And that's not really the place to start from. You, in my opinion, you want to start with all the information from the browser down. I'm picking browser as the outer layer. I'm really talking client level, whatever that client level
Whatever
is.
that is. Not everyone's working with web apps. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, you want to be able to see all of it. And there are tools that will show you that. And it was wonderful when I've been at places that had that, and they hit me up. Hey, things are slow right now. It's not very good. Can you check on that? And I look, and I'm able to provide screenshots, or with if I need screenshots, or if there's somebody standing over my desk, standing over my shoulder at my desk, as you mentioned earlier, I can point and go, hey, see, look right here. It's this part of the web app is the problem. This is where it's slow. And then they walk away and say, oh, we'll go work on that. You know,
Cool way, I'll go work on that. Yeah, I like how you said that. Again, the full stack of diagnostics is great. Um, Agreed, 100%. Now wrap up.
yep. Let's do that. So wrap up questions is just this last area. This is not part of the technical necessarily. It's just the end of the interview process. You get to the end, all the questions have been asked, all the answers have been given, all the data has been collected. Uh,
Everyone's tired, probably hungry.
yes, that too. Which brings me to a slightly off topic or a derailed thing, but it's related. If your interview was scheduled for 30 minutes and you're at 45 minutes and no one seems bothered by that, probably a good thing. They're interested in you. They want to hear from you. They've collected data on you. You've collected data on them. I think that's probably a good thing. But when you get to the end, one of the things I thought about in terms of wrapping up is I wanted a shot to revisit something that made them uncomfortable. I answered a question in a way that they didn't care for, or they're not sure they understood, or they had more questions about my answer. So I came up with this question. You could rephrase it or just not use it if you wanted. But the question is this: based on the interview so far, do you have any concerns or further questions about my experience that I could answer? What do you think about that question? Is it, is it worded strangely? Is it not needed?
No, I actually agree with this. I don't know about wording. I don't have nothing negative with it, but yeah, basically, is there anything we talked about that I could address further? Anything you want to talk about? I agree. I think I'd argue you should do this at the end, right? As long as you're feeling comfortable still. Um, yeah. If you go through the whole call and like everything is very awkward and you're scared at this point, maybe not. But pretty much, if things are going okay, this is when you ask because you never know when there was a misunderstanding. That's really what I'm thinking. They said, well, you said this, and then you might be able to correct them. No, I meant this, or, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Further explain, whatever. It gets them thinking, it gets them talking. You want to know what's in their head, right? This is true both sides. I think it's a phrase we use when we talk about interviewing people too. You're trying to get inside the other person's head, trying to figure out how they think and how they tick, and at speed dating speeds, right?
Yeah, for sure. You want to know what they're thinking. They want to know what you're thinking. It's to give you one last chance for both things to happen. And then the last question I always try to ask is, what are the next steps? You get to the end, you want to know what's next. Is there another interview in the process? If they're going to go forward with you, what happens?
Or if they're not, what happens? Like this, don't skip this question. Even if you're not nervous and scared, even if you're confident, ask what next steps are. A lot of times, if I'm interviewing somebody, if they don't ask, that's on my list of things to talk about. So before I consider myself done, I talk about next steps. Like it's a good way for me to close the call at least. Find out. So I've talked to you. Who am I talking to next? How many people do I need to talk to? If you say 3 and it goes to 4, is that a good thing or a bad thing? If you're not going with me, what's the next steps? What's the timeline we're looking at? No one wants to hear 2 weeks, but they'd rather hear that than sit in the dark.
Absolutely.
If they're in IT and you make them wait 2 weeks, you're probably not getting them.
Also a valid point. If you want good talent, you need to be able to move quickly, and you need to treat those prospective employees with respect, to respect their time, to wait for that first interview, respect their time after whatever phase of the interview you're in, because it's very likely that you're not the only place that person is interviewing with. And, in light of that, if you tell someone 2 weeks and then you don't talk to them for 8 days, and on day 9 you email them or call them and say, hey, we'd like to make you an offer, or hey, we'd like the 4th interview, they might say, oh, I accepted a job last week. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, so that wraps us up for this particular live stream. We've talked fairly good detail, I think, and great length on technical environment questions and what kinds of things you should ask about the technical environment as part of the interview process. So.
Yeah, I think between this one that we did today for well over an hour, and we had well over an hour in the first one, which was the less technical questions. Between those two, I think we covered a lot of bases. We were mostly SQL, mostly data orientated, but as we tend to be. But I think a lot of what we had carries over. A lot of the technological ones, I think you could tweak a little bit to match your particular space, Oracle or maybe a mid developer, whatever. I think we covered a lot. So those of you who missed the first one, both of these will be end up on YouTube. Cleaned up a little bit, less sneezing and glitching, everything else. So, yeah, I hope to see everybody online again next week, next Thursday, and or yelling at us on YouTube that we got something wrong. Sounds great. Um, I'm Anthony Fortner, data engineer. This is ReadySetData, and signing out is Lee Markum.
Database administrator. We'll see you all later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.